just between us, all right?
Sharing relationship issues here with you on Between Us. I'm Angela Lim. It's so great to have you with us. And today's questions: are our teens becoming increasingly lonely and disconnected? How can we communicate better and more effectively with our teens for better relationships? The answers with my guest today, Michelle Koay, who's a counsellor at RGS, here to tell us more about how we can understand our teens a little bit better. Michelle, so happy to have you here today.
Hi, Angela.
You have a rather interesting story because you've not always been a counsellor. I mean, before this, you were an engineer. So tell us a bit about why you decided to make that career transition and your passion for counselling.
Actually, I've always been interested in working with people. And I think before that, I come from the generation where you must choose the type of jobs like doctor, lawyer,
the iron rice
engineer.
Bowls, huh?
Yes. And so that was the type of job that I was supposed to take on, because my dad is also an engineer. So followed the path and did whatever that I'm supposed to do. And then over time, I figured out that I preferred to work with people much more than with machines. So that's why I decided to make the switch.
Tell us about the transition. When you were first getting trained as a counsellor, was there anything that, you kind of were surprised by, in terms of the people that you worked with or situations that you encountered? What was that like, your initial foray into counselling?
Actually, I felt that in a way it was a blessing in disguise that I started on the job much later in my life, because when I was, starting work and so on, I was just this naive young adult. Thinking that I knew everything about life and so on. And so when I was working, I was supposed to be in charge of some technicians and so on. And I learned so much about their lives, because many of them had families too, and they had problems with their colleagues and so on, which I wouldn't have been able to help them with it if I did not start with that in the first place. And so it was over time when I got to know that part of life a little bit more and really grew a little bit older, became more mature, felt that there was perfect time actually to switch jobs.
Yeah, in terms of working with people, I mean, in particular now you're working with teens. Tell us a bit about, why you decided or why it's important to you to be there, to be able to guide teens, especially, in times when they're very troubled or when they have issues that they can't deal with.
That's a really important time of their lives actually with teenagers, because if they don't get through that part of their lives, then it's really hard when they grow older. Because I think when I was a teenager, if I had those opportunities to maybe talk about some of the issues that I was struggling with and had people who could understand me, maybe, I wouldn't have to deal with those issues as an adult. So I think that I would have been really appreciative of that, which is why I think it's really helpful to work with teenagers.
In a way, the teenagers are very formative in terms of who you turn out to be. As a person, you solidify your character and your personality in that time. So anyone, a mentor, it could be a parent, these figures are really important. In a way, we're going to find out a little bit more about your views in terms of how our teens are communicating these days, because I think many parents out there will also identify with this concern that a lot of our teens seem to be more withdrawn. They seem to be more isolated over the years, because even though they are always on their devices, they always have, connections on Facebook and they're always on their phones. Do you think that, maybe they're becoming a little bit more detached from each other, more isolated? Is that something you've observed?
Yeah, most definitely, because they spend so much time on their devices that even when they are with each other having a meal or playing a game or something like that, they will have their attention somewhere else as well, whether it's the computer or any of their other gadgets and so on. So in a way, it may seem that they are kind of connected, but actually they are not really very connected.
To some teens listening it now, they're probably thinking, yeah, but I'm talking to more people at once, I'm even more connected. Or they could also say that maybe this is just the way I'm communicating now, through my devices, through texting. This is the new way forward. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Are there things that we're missing out on if we don't tell our teens or our kids, what to look out for in terms of building deeper relationships?
Well, actually, I think that it is better to take a balanced approach, because we cannot deny the fact that nowadays, you have to be connected in that way as well, whether it's social media or even email or any forms of online kind of connection. So that is something that we cannot take away now, which means that the teens do have to get used to that. Even adults have to get used to that. But then on the other hand, there has to be also a balance in real-time, face-to-face kind of connection as well, both sides of it. And so if there's not enough of that balance between the online stuff and the real face-to-face ones, then you realize that the relationships offline are going to be more and more distant.
What are some of your concerns? I mean, it's easier to see it when you're looking in at the teens. You're exploring their experiences, and you're also looking at their problems. A lot of times, it's very hard for the teen themselves to see if I'm too focused on my device, if I'm too absorbed in the online world versus building my social skills offline. What are some things that might be a problem for them when it comes to connecting with others as they become adults? Do you foresee some challenges coming in their way?
Yeah, actually one of the biggest things would be even as basic as an interview. Because, when they go for something like maybe they're going to apply for university application, that's the first step that they have to go through, and they don't even know how to talk in the first place, or how to express themselves, because usually they're so used to probably preparing something, a really good piece of work, a written work or something like that. And so when the interviewer is actually talking to them, they may not actually know how to maintain eye contact or to do a really simple, basic hello, a small talk thing and so on. Yeah, so that becomes an issue.
Yeah, and that's only on a pragmatic sort of level, right? Already, you're going to have problems getting a job, you're going to have problems getting into the university of your choice. And we're not even looking at relationships yet, which is yet another level, because in a relationship, obviously, you have to connect very deeply with someone emotionally. And if you can't express yourself in a way that allows you to share how you feel and also understand how the other person feels, then a lot of problems are going to crop up in relationships. We're going to find out more about what we can do to reach out not just to our teens, and if you're a teenager listening now, how you can also do a little bit more to connect better with everyone else. I mean, from people in your generation or with your parents as well. All this will give us more fulfilling relationships. Stay tuned on Between Us. Today, my guest is a counsellor with RGS, Michelle Koay, who's telling us more about how to connect better with our younger generation as well, despite all the digital madness that's been going on. Between Us will continue in just a bit. Stay tuned here on 938 Live.
Reset your relationships in Between Us. 938 Live gets you talking.
Thanks for staying tuned to Between Us and 938 Live. My guest today is Michelle Koay. She's a counsellor at RGS, telling us a little bit more about how to connect better with our teens and how to communicate with them. I mean, Michelle, earlier you said that, it is a digital age. It is, we all do have to embrace that on some level. But there are also things that we should look out for, whether you are the teenager or whether you're the parent. Teachers as well have to look out for this. Are there examples of how the teens are becoming increasingly isolated and unable to connect with each other because they're too involved in the online world, perhaps?
Yeah, most of them are kind of like that, and so they talk about how they have difficulty making friends. That's a really common kind of question. And I thought that we are so into teaching them how to use the devices, right? How to use the computer, what software to use, and so on. But we don't actually teach them very basic social skills, which I think that they need nowadays. And I think one of those times when I was talking to one of the girls, and she had the same problems about making friends. And then one day she actually came to me and said that, now she has made a new friend. And so I found out who her new friend is actually one of the classmates as well. And I asked her how they became friends. And it was one of those that they were just chatting online. So everybody else had gone to bed and two of them happened to be online. They were just chatting and they were so happy to find out that they had a lot of common interests. And so that was what it went on and on. And then after that, what happened was I asked them, that's great. So now do you hang out together in school, right? Because they are chatting online all the time. And then after that, she told me that they are really awkward. So I was like, okay. So when they go for their recess, they don't know how to talk to one another and they don't know what to say to one another and how to start the conversation. But they were fine, completely fine when they were back home on their computers. So this is really an issue.
Increasingly, it is good in a way that they are developing that relationship on some level online, but the real world, requires that people do interact with each other, be able to empathize with each other, to be able to connect physically, face to face as well. What was your advice to her? I mean, after seeing that and hearing that it was awkward in person, what are the things that she could have changed, perhaps to make things a little bit better?
Well, so actually one of the things I told her is that she definitely need to have the opportunity to do so. And so that was when they actually started hanging out a little bit more. And then we did a little bit of like some coaching thingy of how she can actually talk and start a conversation, and we can kind of rehearse that in the session itself. And it actually got better over time. And then after that, she told me, after, I can't remember how many sessions it was, she said that they're not so awkward now, which is really good.
So it's a really hopeful message, I mean, if you're thinking about, if you're a child or you're teenagers, you feel socially awkward, there are a lot of things you can do to change that. It's never too late. I suppose earlier is better than later because, as your behavior solidifies, you start, becoming more, your personality, your character starts becoming a bit more concrete. It's a lot harder to change as an adult, and really don't want that to affect our relationships going forward. So Michelle Koay is my guest today. She's going to give us more tips on how to understand where our teenagers are coming from and how we can connect better with them. And also, if you're a teen tuning in right now, how you can connect better with everyone else, in your life as well, for better, more fulfilling relationships. Between Us will continue after headline news and sports here on 938 Live, so stay tuned. Thanks for staying tuned to Between Us and 938 Live. Chatting today with Michelle Koay, a counsellor at RGS, about how to connect better with our teens and how to communicate with them in their language. Michelle, of course, when we think about how teens are getting perhaps increasingly isolated, they can't really communicate face to face, which is the complaint that a lot of, I guess, the people in the older generation do have. What is it like if we think of it as the teens are the problem? I mean, is that really necessarily so? When we look at it as they need to do the changing, what are your thoughts?
Actually, I usually see the teens as part of that bigger system. And so the bigger system would include people like their friends, the teachers, their parents, and of course, other people in society. So the problem doesn't just lie with them. Actually, we have to see what other things do contribute to their behavior as well. Yeah.
I think the importance also, the onus is on the parent or on the teacher or the adult as well to think about how we can be flexible in the way we try to communicate with them. Because I think the mistake most of us make sometimes is to say, oh, it's just them being teens, it's just a phase where we can't connect with them, so let's just not bother. Are there concerns you have about the way things are back home, which is why, it kind of precipitates or kind of encourages even more isolation among the teens? What are some experiences you've had talking to these girls that you work with?
I think one of the main concerns would be nowadays, especially in a city environment like in Singapore, many of the parents, especially both parents, would be working full-time. And so when they work full-time, they do actually spend a lot more time at work. And so the children have to grow up by themselves and they have to take care of themselves most of the time. I think that is a major problem.
Well, how does that actually affect the way that they then communicate with other people? And what can we do to change that?
Well, because if supposing they do not have the opportunity to interact with parents, which is the first thing, right, that they might have less opportunities to maybe seek out an advice or some older person to actually talk about issues. And so they might turn to their friends or any online resources, which is actually sometimes a little bit more troubling.
Right. So how can we, as adults or people who have, I guess, been in a phase where everything is not done online, where everything is not digital communication, what can we do to encourage teens to actually come away from the phones, away from the iPads for just a little bit? And in a way, you've mentioned that you managed to coach a girl on how to have less awkward relations in person with a friend of hers. So how can we also incorporate that into kind of coaching, certain teens, especially if they have trouble communicating, into communicating face-to-face, having social skills?
Actually, I think before you even talk about that, you might have to build rapport with the teenager. So you have to make them feel like you understand them, that you are on their side, that you are not telling them what to do. So that means that you might have to find out a little bit more about how their world works. Like to understand the lingo and to understand how things why it matters to them, why it's important to them.
You have to share the tips with us, Michelle, because I think a lot of parents are looking at just that. How do I connect with my teenager? Like, how do I know what she's interested in? How can I get into his or her space without, kind of encroaching into their privacy? How can we balance that as parents, finding out more but not offending them or not making them feel uncomfortable? What are some tips you might have?
It will be the posture of learning and curiosity. Because if supposing you act like the parent or the adult who knows it all, they're just going to shut out from you. You actually have to ask them, what is this all about? Can you tell me more? And when you ask them questions like that, then the teenager feels, okay, now somebody's listening to me. And I think that's actually a really good way to get them started, because they want to feel like they can actually teach you something. And actually, I learned a lot from the girls that I work with. I did not just learn this and know all these before I started the job. So they taught me a lot of things.
It sounds like listening is really important, right? In a sense that we don't really want a top-down approach that doesn't work clearly. What the teenager needs to feel is important, empowered, that they have something to say that's worth listening to. I think that's how we can start to kind of share our own experiences as well, that we are also taking and giving in that sense. What are some lessons you've learned, from the girls that you do work with?
Well, actually, that is one of the biggest things, They want to feel understood. And so when they let you, if you give them the opportunity to actually share and tell you more about what they struggle with and what maybe their parents do not understand. And then after that, you think about how to help them along, and always leave it open, because when it comes from them, I think they take more ownership about it and they feel more empowered. So I usually try to resist telling them what to do. And maybe sometimes if I really have to, then I might slant the conversation in a certain way so that some of those things actually come out from them. And it's so much more effective.
Right, that's a great tip. In a way, kind of let them make them feel like they are the decision maker.
Yes,
they are in control.
Especially because they are youth, teenagers, they want to have a say. And you cannot just tell them, okay, do this, do that, because they're not going to listen to you.
That tends to backfire. Usually a lot of the times you tell them what to do, they tell you to do the complete opposite, right?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting tips there. We're going to find out more from Michelle today about how we can connect better with our teens, kind of establish better rapport, build trust, I suppose, which is a huge challenge for a lot of parents and teachers out there. Michelle's going to give us some great tips in just a bit on Between Us when we continue with this conversation on how to connect better with our teens. Moving into our final segment of Between Us in 938 Live today with my guest Michelle Koay, who's a counsellor at RGS, telling us how to connect better with our teens, tapping on her experience and expertise right now. Michelle, tell us a bit more about some of the experiences you've had when it comes to counselling with the parents as well. What are some key problems or insights you have noticed about the way parents and their children relate to each other that might, be reflective of what a lot of our listeners are going through as well?
I think like what we were talking about just now, about how the teenagers usually feel really misunderstood. So there was once this parents came storming in and were ready to tell me about how difficult their daughter is and that I should fix her because she's really problematic. And so that session was really loud, on the parent side. And then after that, I called the girl in and asked her what was going on. And I was really surprised because she was just teary throughout the entire session. And she felt that her parents didn't understand her point of view. So I just listened to her a little bit more and felt that there is hope for this family in that sense. And then after that, I spoke to her for a few times and I got the parents to also talk, just separately. And then when the time felt right, I asked the girl whether she would be ready to have her mom in the session with her. And that was the start of it. So I had both of them. And to tell you honestly, that first session was really hard because both of them were very emotional.
A lot of pent-up frustration.
Yes,
right?
Both of them had a lot of that. And so it was a little bit difficult. And I wasn't quite sure if the session went well. And so I was really worried about that. And I said they should come back another time. And so the second time when they came back, before they came back, that was around Mother's Day actually. So I asked the mother whether, she had a good Mother's Day. And I was really surprised because the daughter, in a really long time, has not really done anything in particular. And the mother was so happy because she made something for her and also cooked for her.
Wow. Okay.
And I was like, wow, that's really nice, And then, so when the both of them came in the second session, a lot of things had become a lot better between the mother and the daughter.
Sometimes all you need is to kind of open the lines of the communication, because if you've had a bad relationship for a while, it's really hard to kind of take ourselves out of that dynamic. Now, on a final note, Michelle, you have parents tuning in right now, I'm sure, who have trouble relating to their teens or have trouble communicating with them. What's a good first step to take, and also subsequently, what would you want to say to listeners to encourage them to step out of their comfort zone a little bit to understand our teens better?
I would say taking time. Yeah. Because usually we are very busy. Actually, whether you're working or you're a stay-at-home mom, stay-at-home parents are also really busy. Really need to take time to spend time with, whether they are children or teenagers. I think it's the same. All of us need that time to build relationships. And you can't just talk about quality time. I think we do need quantity time as well. And so sitting together, having something that is maybe an informal kind of like conversation over a meal, usually that's a lot more lighthearted, and not just ask about, have you done your homework and what are your examination results. Something else about each other. And I think the parents can also share a little bit personal stuff about themselves too, about how maybe they struggle sometimes with their day-to-day stuff, and the child can feel that, oh, my parents are also as human as me.
Right. It sounds like, for you, the important thing is kind of removing that power distance, the idea that I'm the parent, you listen to me, that the communication is one way. It's very clear the child's going to shut down because you're talking down to the child. So really, it's about trying to relate, trying to listen, and putting yourself in a position where your child can trust you. Any final tips for our listeners, Michelle? If they were to start right now, apart from taking time, what can they say to kind of remove any barriers between them and their children, if any at all?
Help me understand better. Sometimes that is a very good way of asking the other person, whether is it the child or your partner or your friend. Because it's also an opportunity for them to talk about something. Help me understand.
Wonderful. Michelle Koay is my guest today. She's a counsellor at RGS, and she's been telling us so far great tips on how to connect better with our teens. Thank you so much for listening to Between Us today. Michelle, it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.